Hey YouTube friends, I am so excited because today I am starting a new series on my gardening channel. I am going to grow my own bread. You heard me right. I'm gonna plant, grow, harvest, process, mill wheat flour and make my own bread from it. I'm so excited about this. It's been a dream of mine for a long time. I'm always interested in the techniques of how people survived in ancient times. And wheat is such a huge part of the stories and the history and the parables of the Holy Bible. And so I wanted to experience that. I think it's a cool thing to be able to know how to grow your own food. And that's a big part of what we do in my garden. But one of the most important things that we eat every day is wheat in the form of bread and crackers and pasta. But so often we don't really know how that really works and how do we get the bread that we eat. And so I want to learn how to do that. But I also want to, as I do it, I want to experience what people throughout history have experienced as they grew what is known as the staff of life. Wheat production is what is credited with really helping people to be able to have civilization. Wheat is, in some sense, it is sort of a symbol of civilization because it's something that requires great intelligence and skill and human technology. You can grow a lot of different things. Tomatoes are a wonderful thing. That's a beautiful thing to grow in your garden because there's nothing like the taste of a homegrown tomato. But when it comes to bread, it requires you to be able to grow that bread, harvest it and process it, mill it, and then take the flour and turn that into a loaf of bread or some crackers or some pasta. So that is something that requires real human intelligence and wisdom. And that's why I think bread so often has become a symbol of civilization and being humans as opposed to being wild animals. And that is certainly what we see in scriptures. The bread is known as the bread of life, and Jesus talks about that, and he talks about scattering seeds and winnowing and separating out the wheat from the weeds. So growing bread, growing wheat is such a huge part of our spirituality and what it really means to be a human. We couldn't be the people that we are today if ancient people had not discovered how to grow, preserve, and cook wheat. And so I'm going to be experiencing that all season long. And I'm going to start today with my introductory video as I plant my wheat. So thanks for joining me today. Get ready and let's dig in. So I'm going to plant my wheat here in my in-ground plot that is about 40 feet by 25 feet. This grew corn, another grain that I was able to process and to turn into corn flour and grits. And you can watch a video. I'll leave a link for that in the description. But after growing corn, and I also grew some amaranth and some okra and some flowers in this field, I took the corn stalks and I ground them up in my chipper, and then I added them back to the field and then had my neighbor till this up and make it nice and fluffy and soft. So it is very rich and fertile now and ready to go. And I've just got a few little patches that I need to just clean up with a rake to kind of level everything out a little bit. So I'm going to start by doing that so I've got a nice level field to work with. So the first thing we're going to do, we're just going to get some of the weeds that are still in the plot out. And there are a few spots that need to be leveled. So we're going to use a rake to sort of just level things out. It's a pretty sturdy rake, and we'll just use this to kind of fill in any low spots and get things sort of evened out. Pull out any rocks I happen to see or any weeds that still are in the plot after being tilled. We'll just pull them out and discard them. It doesn't really have to be perfect. We're not doing rows. This whole plot is going to be a field of wheat. And it's going to be really pretty, I think, once it gets going. So the name of the kind of wheat I am growing is Georgia Gore wheat. And there are a ton of different varieties of wheat. There are three main classifications for wheat: winter or spring, red or white, and hard or soft. Spring or winter refers to the growing season. Spring wheat is planted in early spring and grows quickly to be harvested in late summer or early fall. Winter wheat is planted in fall and develops over the winter and is harvested the next spring or summer. Since I'm not growing anything else in this garden plot over the winter, I thought it would be a good time to grow wheat here. I want to harvest this wheat early enough next year so I still have time to use this plot to grow some corn before it gets cold again. Growing wheat over the winter will also protect the soil from erosion or from being overrun with weeds. Wheat is a good cover crop that can outcompete weeds, and it also provides nourishment for the soil if you rework it into the soil after you harvest, and it's a staple of life that provides flour. So I think it's going to be a great thing to grow. Wheat can also either be red or white. Red wheat has slightly more protein and a nuttier flavor and is typically better for hearty artisan bread loaves. White wheat tends to have a softer texture and a sweeter flavor, typical of softer loaves and rolls. Wheat can also be either hard or a soft variety. Hard varieties have more gluten, making hard wheat dough stretchier. Soft wheat varieties have less gluten, making them more crumbly and better suited for cakes or pastries or cookies. There are so many different varieties of wheat, and each is tailored to grow in certain areas and resist diseases that might be in your area. It's important to do research and decide which wheat variety is best suited for your specific area. And you have to keep up with that because, you know, bacteria and diseases and insects are constantly evolving, and they love to attack wheat. And so wheat varieties are also constantly evolving to try to combat the specific types of bacteria, diseases, and bugs that attack wheat in your particular climate. The variety I chose as best for my area right now is in the northwest Georgia area where I live, is Georgia Gore wheat, and it's a soft red winter variety. If you wanted to get really technical, you should plant winter wheat seeds about 21 to 23 plants per square foot. That's what I've read online. Another site says that the seeds should be about 3 inches apart. So I guess you can gather from that the rate at which you should plant your wheat. I'm not being really specific in my measurements. I'm doing this by hand. You could use a spreader like you could even use like uh, a grass seed spreader like you might use to reseed your lawn. But I really, for myself, I just wanted to do this the traditional way because I'm really thinking about how would people plant wheat in biblical times. And to me, they didn't use spreaders. They would just get out there and broadcast this by hand. As a matter of fact, Jesus even talks about, he's taught a parable about a person who sowed their seed. And in that parable, you sort of get this sense of how indiscriminate the sower is. He's just out there sowing it, and some seed falls on the pathway, and some falls in the rocky soil, and some falls in weedy soil, and other falls on good soil. So you get this sense that the farmer's just out there kind of throwing that seed out there in the field. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going out here and I'm just sort of throwing it out in the field. I want to make sure that it's evenly spread, but then I'm not really being too critical about how densely it's spread. Just want to make sure that it's spread well. Also, research says that you should plant it probably about an inch and a half deep, an inch deep. But there again, I'm not using equipment that's really going to do that. I'm going to broadcast it, and then I'm going to take a rake and rake it in. So it's not necessarily going to be an inch deep, and that's why I'm going to sort of over broadcast this a little bit. I have plenty of wheat seed, but I want to make sure that some of that seed is not going to germinate. So I want to make sure that I have good germination. I have enough seeds to germinate. Now, after I have spread my seed on the surface of the soil, I am going to use this big honking rake that I have made myself, and I'll leave a link in the description to the video of how I made my own rake. And this is just a big wide rake that you drag over the surface of the soil, and it sort of helps incorporate the seed into the soil. Again, it may or may not get the seed actually down to an inch, but it hopefully will at least get most of the seed below the surface of the soil and get it in some good contact with the soil so that it can get some germination. If we can get it to germinate and get it started and get it going, it really won't matter how deep it is. Over time, it will be just fine. Now, wheat doesn't need that much water, especially since it grows during the cooler months. Spring wheat grows in a cooler time of the year, and winter wheat especially grows in a cool time of the year. So we're not losing as much water to evaporation. And wheat doesn't need that much water. Over the course of 7 or 8 months, we're probably going to need between 18 to 20 inches of water total. And so that comes out to about a half an inch to 3/4 of an inch of water per week. But most of that water, a lot of that water will be at the beginning of the life cycle because I'm planting in September and it's still warm outside in the 80s and 90s. And so we're going to give it a lot of water to start with. Plus we want to use that water to help the plants germinate, put their roots down deep into the soil, and get up and running. So I'm going to use an overhead sprinkler. I really like this sprinkler that I got from Lowe's Home Improvement. I bought this over a year ago, and I guess it's called a Melnor. It's adjustable, and that makes it very versatile. So the way this works, you can adjust here by moving these slides up. You can adjust how wide is the sweep, and by adjusting this switch and this switch, you can also adjust how wide is the fan. So it really makes it a versatile sprinkler. I use this in my cornfield over the summer just to get the corn started. And I've used this in my lawn as well. It's really good to be able to adjust the pattern like that. And another thing I highly recommend, just a useful little thing, when you have a sprinkler like this, put a little cutoff switch right there on the end of it, because you know, you see how far away that wheat field is. I don't want to have to run all the way back to my house, turn the water on, turn the water off, run all the way back out there. So by putting this little cutoff switch here, it allows me to cut it off, make adjustments, cut it off, cut it back on, you know, cut it off, move it to another spot, then cut it back on. It just makes life a whole lot easier. So I highly recommend that. And I'm very pleased with this sprinkler, and I would definitely recommend it. I'm going to use this sprinkler on my wheat field just to get it started, because probably I'll be using it all this week. The reason is there's no rain in the forecast at all this week. You can see how sunny and beautiful it is today, but it's going to be like this all week. It's going to be sunny, warm. Some days are going to be in the 90s. Some are going to be in the upper 80s. And there's no rain at all. So hopefully through the growing season this winter, I won't have to water this a lot. Once I can get it established, it will, you know, whatever rain we get should be enough. But to get it started, to get it germinating, I'm going to go ahead and get it wet. Probably going to water it today and tomorrow. And then after that, I'll probably skip a day, maybe even skip 2 days. Just keep an eye on the soil and how damp is the soil. Is it staying moist? If it starts to dry out, then I'm going to give it some water. But wheat is not a plant that really requires a lot of water. It grows during the cooler seasons of the month, or cooler months of the season anyway. And so it shouldn't use a lot of water, but we're going to water it just to get it started. And to be honest, I'm kind of happy about that, because once you put that seed down, if you get a deluge of rain, if you really get a lot of rain, you could actually wash that seed away. By using the sprinkler, I can really control that variable, control how much water is that wheat getting. And I can make sure it gets just the right amount while it's really vulnerable in this early stage. I want it to get established, get some good strong roots down, and germinate, get some good strong roots down, and get started. Once the plants get established, they'll be able to handle, you know, a little bit of extra rain or a little bit of extra dryness. So that's what we're going to do. You want to water your wheat deeply. So it's better to give it a lot of water at one time and then wait a little while to water it again. So you don't want to give it a light watering, you want to give it a heavy watering. So it's better to water, say, give it a heavy watering and then wait a day or two, skip a day or two, and then water it again. That encourages not just wheat, but it encourages any plant to put down deeper roots. If plants are constantly getting just a little bit of water, but often, then they don't concentrate on putting out really deep roots. But if they only get a watering every so many days, and when they get it, they get a lot, then that encourages deep roots to collect that water when it comes. I'm going to give it a good deep watering today as I plant it, and then I'm going to come back tomorrow and give it another good deep watering. And then after that, I'm probably going to water it every other day. I'll just keep an eye on it to see how, you know, is the soil staying moist, or is it just really drying out? I don't want it to, you know, if I see that the soil is drying out, then I'm going to go ahead and give it a watering. But so far, about every other day or every 3 days seems to be the sweet spot for right now. We're going to get these plants to germinate, and then we'll kind of watch it and see how often we need to water it after that. It can be kind of tricky, especially when you're first starting out, to know how much to water your plants. Every little plant's going to take a little bit different amount of water, and it always tells you it'll need a certain number of inches of rain per week, but how do you determine how much rain is coming out of your hose? So I made this video to help with that, because it was something that I was wanting to know and needing to know when I first got started in my garden. Maybe it'll help you too. I hope you'll follow along in this series as I grow this wheat from September and hopefully harvest it in May or June. I'm going to be walking you through the various steps of growing and harvesting and processing wheat. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the history of how ancient people grew wheat back in biblical times, as well as in America in our pioneering days. So I think you'll learn a lot, and it'll be something that will help you grow as a person, spiritually, and also just intellectually as well. So I'll be creating a playlist for growing wheat, and I hope you will subscribe to my channel and click the bell icon so that you'll get notifications whenever I put out a new video. And follow along as we go on this journey together to grow our own bread. For literally thousands of years, bread was what made civilization possible, what allowed people to grow enough food to support a population that was dense enough to live together in a town or village, or even really large cities. All the way back in antiquity, being able to grow wheat and barley and other grains, and having the knowledge and the technology to process those tiny little seeds into something that was edible and delicious and desirable, and also something that could be preserved. It made civilization possible. It makes life, really, as we know it today, possible. And even though we live in the modern world, and we don't think about food the same way people in ancient times did, because if we live in modern world in places like America, food is just so readily available to us that we take it for granted. But there's still people that live in different parts of the world that have to struggle daily and think really hard every day about where is their next meal going to come from. But even in our modern world, bread really makes life possible, because otherwise there just wouldn't be enough food to support the kinds of numbers of people that we have in the world today. So bread is still the staff of life for us. But Jesus said that he is the bread of life. And he takes the idea of bread one step further. Not just that bread is the staff of life, but that he is the bread of life for us. True life. Something that goes beyond just our basic needs, our basic physical needs. We have a spiritual dimension to us as human beings that sets us apart from all other animals and all the rest of creation. There's that connection between us and God. And Jesus Christ is the key to that source of our life. And so we need to focus on Jesus as diligently as we focus on food for our bodies and bread for our nourishment. And Jesus said, man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. And that shows us just how critical our relationship with God is. And then in the very end of his life, when Jesus was about to be arrested and crucified, he shared a meal with his disciples. It was his last meal before his execution. You might think he would pick a steak, or some other kind of favorite food. What would you pick as your last meal? For Jesus' last meal, he picked bread and wine. Two very ordinary things that people had with just about every meal in Jesus' time. Very ordinary, but he took those ordinary things that are essential for life and he turned them into something extraordinary. He said to his disciples, as he broke the bread, he gave it to them and he said, "This is my body, which I'm giving for you." And likewise, after the meal, he took the cup of wine and he raised it to heaven and he asked his disciples, or he asked the Lord to bless it, and then he gave it to his disciples and said, "Take and drink from this, because this is my blood of the new covenant, which is poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins." And so in these two very ordinary things, but if you think about it, both bread and wine, although they're ordinary, they are very human elements, because bread is not something that you can just pick out of the field. You have to pick it. You have to use the knowledge God gave you and the technology that you have developed with your mind and turn it into bread. And likewise, grape juice, wine, must be picked from the vine. But in order to drink wine, you have to process those grapes and turn them into something specific. Wine. Not vinegar, not some rancid, spoiled mush, but a desirable, drinkable, enjoyable wine. Jesus used those two elements to tell his disciples who he was. He is able to use this terrible thing that is about to happen to him, being nailed to the cross, and he's going to transform that terrible evil into the greatest good that humanity has ever known. The key to our salvation, the key to showing us what real love is. Greater love has no man than that he lay down his life for his friends. That's what Jesus did for us. He truly is the bread of life. I hope that you will hear those words to you today from God, that Jesus is your bread of life. He's what you really need to be fully human, but also to be fully human in the sense that you have a real, personal, actual relationship with the divine God who created you. That's your purpose. Jesus makes it possible for you to have true life. Thanks for joining me today. Now let's get out there and let's grow and be fruitful.